Welcome to Electrified. It's your host, Dylan Loomis. So, this one big, beautiful bill that passed the House by one vote will now go to the Senate. So, we do need to touch on a few quick things. And unfortunately, for fans of clean cars and energy, it's not so beautiful. We're not going to do a deep dive or anything yet because there could certainly be changes in the Senate, but until that vote happens, I think it's good to be prepared for what may be coming. On the $7,500 EV tax credit, for any company that sold more than 200,000 qualifying vehicles in this program, it will end for them at the end of this year, which means definitely for Tesla and most established automakers, that program will end at the end of 2025. The bill also includes new registration fees for hybrid and EVs. Hybrids would see an annual fee of $100, and the registration fee for electric vehicles would be $250. And as we said before, it sounds like that would be in addition to any state level fees. That's because at the federal level, that money would go toward highway repairs and maintenance, that via the Highway Trust Fund. And at the state level, that money would go toward funding state transportation infrastructure like roads, bridges, and sometimes public transit. We already have nearly a dozen states that have an EV registration fee at the state level of $200 or more, which means if you're in one of those states and this beautiful bill goes through, then you'll be looking at nearly $500 in annual registration fees for having an electric vehicle. And yes, I'll pause here and express my frustration with all of this, not just because EV owners will be paying materially more than the average combustion engine car owner pays in gas tax, but because our government is so backwards in continuing to fund oil and gas to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, but they're going to cut the funding for the new, clean, renewable forms of transportation and energy. And as you'll see later with Elon, the US government is just too far gone. All we can do is support Tesla and clean energy with our choices and wallets for now, outside of getting involved. But thinking through what this bill might do to the clean energy sector over the next 5 years and the negative impact it'll have on hundreds of thousands of jobs is quite unfortunate. Princeton did a study on repealing these incentives, and they said EV sales would make up 24% of new car sales in 2030 in the US if they're taken away. That's compared to 40% if they were left in place. So if you assume 13 million cars are sold in the US in 2030, that would be 2 million less EVs during that year. One of the outcomes you can take to the bank if this bill goes through is that many legacy automakers will decide to delay plans for new car and battery factories, specifically EV factories. Now, whether these companies shift their focus to hybrids or combustion is up in the air. I say that because if there is a small silver lining here, it's that the $7,500 tax credit for hybrid vehicles with over a 7 kilowatt-hour battery are also going away at the end of this year if passed. That obviously never should have been there in the first place, so it's great that that's gone, and that will definitely impact the profitability of hybrids for legacy auto. And if you were wondering about the cumulative impact of these incentives going away from that Princeton study, they're expecting automakers to sell 8 million fewer EVs in the US by 2030. The Council on Clean Transportation estimates that if the incentives were left in place, the IRA would create 118,000 jobs through 2030. But all of those jobs, plus 12,000 more, would be lost if that legislation is repealed. This bill would undercut new factories and mining projects by quickly phasing out incentives to manufacture batteries and mine and refine raw materials like lithium. The credits would expire in 2 years for projects that used Chinese know-how. So think about partnerships like Ford and CATL in Michigan. A director at the Zero Emission Transportation Association said this bill, as currently written, would be devastating for critical mineral production and refining in the US. As we've talked about in weeks past, low lithium prices are the biggest problem for lithium producers right now. Prices are going to have to rise before these projects would become economic, but if the federal tax credits are eliminated, the prices will have to rise that much more. So, of course, Tesla's lithium refinery will still be valuable to have Tesla's own supply and to decouple slowly from the rest of the world, but it might not be as much of a money printer as Elon was expecting just a few years back. Now, some people are saying the production tax credit for manufacturing battery cells and module could be at risk. However, I'm finding that the main change to Section 45X has to do with the transferability of those tax credits. To date, a taxpayer that earned these credits, if they didn't have enough of a tax bill to take advantage of them, they could sell those credits to another company. So this bill would repeal the transferability of those 45X credits starting in 2028. But the only change to the credits themselves would be pulling forward the phase out by 1 year, bumping it up from 2032 to 2031. Meaning, yes, Tesla would likely be able to earn those production tax credits in partnership with Panasonic and on its own for 4680s for at least the next 5 years. And as we've said on the consumer EV tax credit side, Tesla is likely to take a hit somewhere between $150 to $300 million in profit per quarter from losing that tax credit. So yes, Tesla's profitability would take a meaningful hit starting next year, ceteris paribus. And of course, there would likely be a pull forward of Tesla's demand to this year. The administration has also held back $7.5 billion for charging infrastructure, and this legislation would eliminate tax credits for people and businesses that install EV chargers. And the big problem here, this would put America even further behind China on key technology. This would be a big step backwards for America's energy independence, as the bill would terminate that 30% residential clean energy credit, which is Section 25D for homeowners, and that would go into effect at the end of this year as well. That Section 25D also covered qualified battery storage systems, think the Powerwall, which would also be eliminated at the end of this year. Just remember, there is so much more nuance to all of this. Here's an example. Robbie said he works at Sunrun and the owner of the East Coast works at his office. He said this bill does not remove tax credits for commercial solar installations, which is what all of Sunrun's residential installs are technically considered because Sunrun is leasing the equipment to homeowners. So as mentioned, we need to wait and see what changes happen, if any, in the Senate and what goes on with these loopholes. But the simple takeaway, if you're thinking about buying solar, a Powerwall, or an EV, you might want to do it this year if you qualify. And to be clear, there is a lot more in this bill, some things that I do actually really like, but through the lens of clean sustainability, there is certainly a fair amount of negatives. For what it's worth, there's already been chatter that 5 or so GOP senators may oppose this bill in its current form. Given that this bill is being pushed through the budget reconciliation process, that means it requires a simple majority vote, which would be 51 votes, and Republicans hold a 53-47 majority in the Senate. So at the very least, I would say it's pretty likely that changes are made to this bill, and if they pass an amended version, then it would have to go back to the House. So we'll keep an eye on it, but the last thing I would say, most companies have known this is coming. It really does not take an expert to see how the winds have been blowing since the election. Any prudent company would not plan a business model on these incentives being in place forever. So a lot of the shifting of production to hybrids and back to combustion was done as a front running of this situation. What America really needs is stability in policies so manufacturing companies can plan accordingly. We know most companies are not as agile as Tesla. This back and forth situation with policies really is such a joke, and again, it is a shame. Now, here's where things get even more two-sided. Elon said, "I've come to the perhaps obvious conclusion that accelerating GDP growth is essential. Doge has and will do great work to postpone the day of bankruptcy of America, but the profligacy of government means that only radical improvements in productivity can save our country." He said that sharing a post that said, "I wonder if this is why Elon has somewhat moved away from politics in order to accelerate GDP growth with humanoid robots. If he believes this is the only solution, then this would be his most logical choice." Then Elon was asked, how soon can humanoid robots have an actual effect on the GDP of any country? gigafactory. Elon said 4 to 5 years, but robot cars, aka FSD, should have a noticeable effect in 1 to 2 years. Elon also replied to that post about accelerating GDP growth with humanoid robots with a target emoji. So on one hand, this is incredibly bullish for Tesla. Elon is declaring that Tesla rapidly accelerating productivity with FSD and Optimus is the only path to save America. Elon knows he needs to shift his focus and attention on driving innovation and the rate of progress at Tesla, or America's in big trouble. So as a Tesla shareholder, this has to be music to your ears. Elon just realized he can't make as much of an impact on government spending. Involvement in politics may be somewhat of a dead end, and his time and energy will be better spent elsewhere. Really doing what he does best, focusing on technology and product innovation engineering. And I know I don't need to explain any further why this is so exciting for Tesla. However, this also means that not even Elon and the Doge All-Star team can make a big enough dent in our government's waste and overspending. It's too far gone, there's too much bureaucracy, too much red tape, too many entrenched powers, decades of policies, spending patterns, and incentive structures put in place that can't be unwound by perhaps the greatest efficiency and productivity czar our world has ever seen. In short, America's in trouble. I don't know how or what that's going to look like, but if Elon and Tesla don't succeed at transitioning our country to sustainable abundance, Elon believes America is likely to have a time of reckoning, which is disheartening when you really think it through, but now the importance of supporting and rooting for Tesla has gone to an entirely new level. So the stage is set for a pretty special 3-year period coming up with Elon dialed in to what needs to happen, talking about Tesla way more than he was during the earlier part of this year, and the race is on. On X, Matt said, "I think the appetite to cut spending in Congress was so much lower than even Elon ever anticipated. Doge has done incredible work, but the GOP has failed to actually implement any of the cuts." To that, Elon said, "Yeah, sigh." Right on cue, Elon said Tesla self-driving massively improves your quality of life and safety for the thousands of life hours you're in a car. That was sharing what James Dalma said, which is still not widely understood. Frequent travel between San Francisco and LA has been an enormous drain on my time and energy for 25 years. FSD has nearly eliminated it. This technology has significantly improved my quality of life. Tesla is now sending invites to some owners, inviting them for a 48-hour experience of a new Tesla vehicle, which is a great time to do it for the long weekend thanks to Memorial Day. The UK has had a tax in place for vehicles over £40,000. So this tax that was costing buyers hundreds of pounds is set to be axed entirely for battery-powered vehicles. Reason being, this tax has been blamed for stifling sales and increasing the risk of manufacturers failing to shift to EVs in sufficient quantities. They actually called this the Tesla tax, but it sounds like that will be going away. Tesla is back at it on the trademark front, going for Cybercab and Robotaxi, but this time with their custom stylized fonts. The last one we reported on that was rejected was just the word Robotaxi without any custom font. And as we talked about, Tesla can still appeal that. But these are new applications, again, for their custom font. I totally understand why some of you are now totally writing off Dan Ives, but for what it's worth, he bumped his Tesla price target back to $500 and said Tesla could reach a $2 trillion market cap by the end of 2026 in a bull case scenario. The $1 trillion of AI valuation will start to get unlocked in the Tesla story, and we believe the march to a $2 trillion valuation over the next 12 to 18 months has now begun. We believe Tesla remains the most undervalued AI play in the market today. And you guys know I've been vocal in my critique of Dan Ives over the past year when he started panicking about Tesla stock. But I have to admit, what he is saying now is pretty much spot on with what I'm expecting to happen. The Kilowatts shared some pictures, this of a Model X sitting near a supercharger at Fremont. You'll find a front bumper camera, and on the interior, you'll see some blue tape going across the dash and the doors. So we still can't really tell too much, but something is going on. They also saw a Model S with a front bumper camera, as well as that more aggressive diffuser on the back. And the S also had some blue tape in the interior. And if you didn't notice, this car does have a manufacturer plate. Tesla stock closed the day at $339.34, down 0.5%, while the NDX was down 0.93%. The volume was 23% below the average. Hope you all have a safe, wonderful, long holiday weekend. Please like the video if you did. You can find me on X, linked below. And a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters.